abolition of the NRI quota right of Hindu to his personal law in matter of adoption and surrogacy. And before we have come to this platform, I was sharing with Mr. Dave. He said that it was his effort, endeavor that some trigger and thought process of surrogacy law came into being, and I was surprised that he was succeeded in giving the judgment. He got the judgment in favor of the clients, and that only shows that what we invariably say, what we have learned from persons like Justice S.G. Anand, to say that the lawyer can only be successful if it doesn't think out of the box. Out of the box means a thought process which could generate energy. And while we were introducing Mr. Dave, the interesting, fascinated fact is the God also thought that we should connect such person on the Facebook itself, so that people not only are restricted to his insights to this platform, but also to the Facebook. So during this lockdown, we are happy that the God has helped us to connect back on the Facebook with his show. Over to you, sir. And before we proceed, I will just say 2 lines. We are too glad that Mr. Aseem Pandya has been helping us to connect people in Gujarat. And he has also been a good support to us, acting as a mentor and an elder brother in connecting people in Gujarat. And we have seen that, as we have seen in Kerala, Madras, different courts who have connected with us on this platform, that their knowledge has always helped us to look better during these times. Amongst us, we also have Justice S.D. Anand, former judge of Punjab Haryana High Court. The participants who have been connected with us know for the fact that Mr. Pandya and Mr. S.D. Anand, while giving their insights of their knowledge, had shown that what volume of knowledge they have, which that is why, and it also shows they are quite humble. As they say that trees which have fruits are always humble. And that is why they are connecting invariably. One lesson to be learned from both of them is that even though that you have reached to the higher status, one shouldn't feel that I have acquired sufficient knowledge, so I shouldn't join. This is a lesson well learned during this lockdown, that whatever we say that as a student of law, one should keep on learning. There are 2 examples and large number of other speakers and former judges who have connected with us on this platform, who have given me at least this flip on the mind that one should keep on learning from the people who have good knowledge. Over to you, Mr. Dave. And again, we are thankful from the bottom of the heart for accepting our invite and sharing your knowledge on this platform.
Good afternoon to everyone. Special thanks to Beyond Law CLC and particularly Mr. Vikas Chatrat for inviting me for this webinar, and that too for delivering a talk on the topic on which I would always like to speak on. I am also delighted to see that Justice Anand has spared time, so also my friend Aseem Pandya. Coming to the topic straight, the concept of self-financing educational institutions, judicial trend. Let me commence first with the concept of self-financing educational institutions before I turn to their rights and obligations on which I'm supposed to speak today. Let me first of all explain what do we mean by self-financing pattern of education. According to me, and it is so hailed by the Supreme Court also, this is nothing but a cost-based system of education where a student has to bear the cost of his or her education. And that's how it is known as self-financing pattern of education. Of course, jokingly and sometimes sarcastically by those who are anti-self-financing institutions would describe this self-financing pattern of education as a system where Goddess Lakshmi is preferred over Goddess Saraswati. They would say that this is a temple of education where Lakshmi Puja is first and it is followed by Saraswati Puja. Be that as it may, let people say whatever they want to say, but we live in the era where we have to have self-financing pattern of education. The reason for the same is obvious. The state is not having enough resources to provide education at all levels and to everyone. And therefore, the private sector has to come in and has to run the show on the pattern of self-financing. Therefore, to say that self-financing is an evil, it will lead to many kind of malpractices. I would say that take any system, there are always two sides of the coin, and you have to bear with that. It's not that a self-financing pattern of education will always lead to something which is not desirable. As a matter of fact, if you look at the history, ever since the concept of self-financing gained momentum in this country, we have noticed so many good institutions coming to the surface which were previously not there. Now, so far as self-financing institutions and their rights and obligations are concerned, they are always subject of various landmarks judgments of the Supreme Court. I would say that journey of self-financing institutions with Supreme Court, which started with Mohini Jain's case in 1992, is still continuing. We can say temporarily it has taken a halt with the recent decision of the Supreme Court in 2016 in the matter of modern dental. But if you see the line, the chain, you will find that there is a sea change. You will notice swing and the shift both in the trend, judicial trend, in interpreting, construing, explaining the rights and obligations of self-financing institutions. So let us begin with the first, that is Mohini Jain's case. And let us try to appreciate as to how the trend has subsequently developed, changed, keeping in mind the felt necessities of the time. So Mohini Jain's case, 1992, 3 SCC 666666. This was a case where a contention was raised by a student who was getting an admission in a medical college in self-financing institution, we call it SFI for short, in the seats called management seat, where she was required to pay a higher amount of fee as compared to those who were getting admission in the same college on government seat. And she filed a petition, direct petition with the Supreme Court, questioning the validity of this particular provision, saying that it's an obligation of the state to provide education. Right to education is required to be read as an integral part of Article 21. And if I am unable to pay the fee of management seat, I must be accommodated somehow at the fee which is prevalent for the government seats. The Supreme Court in Mohini Jain's case construed right to education as an integral part of Article 21 and came to the conclusion that this concept of dividing total seats in a medical college into government seats and management seats, or you may call it free seats and the payment seats, And those who are getting on the payment seats will have to pay higher fees, and those who are getting admission in the order of merit on government seat or a free seat will have to pay a fee equivalent to one prevalent in the government medical college, was not based on any justifiable classification. And accordingly, this provision contained in the relevant regulation was struck down by the Supreme Court. This led to question the correctness of the decision in Mohini Jain's case. In a second judgment, that is Unni Krishnan case, which is one of the landmark judgments of the Supreme Court. In Unni Krishnan case, the plea of the self-financing institutions was to the effect that, well, if Mohini Jain's case is to be applied stricto sensu, and our right to claim fee is to be curtailed this wise, then it is difficult for us to sustain. It's nothing but striking death knell of our existence. And this decision of the Supreme Court requires reconsideration. So in Unni Krishnan's judgment, the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that right to education can be read into Article 21 as an integral part thereof, but to a limited extent. Right of the citizen to claim free education from the state cannot go beyond the age of 14 years. So they read down Mohini Jain's ratio in Unni Krishnan's judgment by holding that right to education up to the age of 14 years would be an integral part of right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. Beyond that, one cannot compel a state to provide education if resources of the state are not permitting that. So in turn, with this Unni Krishnan judgment, it was possible for the self-financing institutions to claim higher fee, to prescribe a different fee structure in respect of seats available in an unaided or what we call it self-financing institution. However, at the same time, in Unni Krishnan's judgment, the Supreme Court provided certain riders. And in the absence of any legislation, central legislation operating across the nation, the Supreme Court, in exercise of its powers under Article 141, thought it fit to evolve a scheme. And for the first time, for professional education, a scheme was evolved by the Supreme Court. And as per this scheme, it was provided that available seats for education in a professional college would be divided into two parts. One, free seats. Second, payment seats. Those who are in a position to get the admission in the order of merit in free seat will have to pay the fee which is prevalent or equivalent to the fee in a government college of a similar nature. So far as students getting the admission in the order of merit on payment seats are concerned, they will be required to pay a higher fee. And they say that distribution of fee or rather fee structure between free seats and payment seats would be decided keeping in mind the cost of imparting education, because it is nothing but a cost-based system of education. So for the first time in the scheme which came to be provided by the Supreme Court in Unnikrishnan's case. The right of self-financing institutions to prescribe a fee structure came to be regulated. And if I had to explain how it was regulated, because later on this very view was found to be not sustainable, therefore let me say or explain with the help of an example how this scheme was working. First of all, this scheme said that the cost of imparting education in a self-financing institution is required to be determined. Once you arrive at the cost of imparting education, you have to arrive at, as a next step, the fee structure in such a manner that it is possible for the self-financing institution to recover the cost of imparting education from the fees they collect from the students. Now here the fee structure was divided in two parts. For free seats, fee was equivalent to the government college. In respect of payment seats, higher fee structure was provided. Then how to work out this fee structure in a cost-based system of education? So scheme further provides, and which I would like to explain with the help of a hypothetical example. Say the cost of any self-financing institution for a particular course for the purpose of imparting education is rupees 50 lakh per annum. And total number of students to be enrolled, that is the strength of the college or the intake capacity of the college, is 100. So per student, the fee would come to rupees 50,000 if that cost is to be distributed amongst all 100 students. So 50,000 each student will have to pay per year so as to see that 50 lakhs cost, which is required to be incurred for imparting education, can be recovered by the institution from the fees to be received. But again, here free seats were provided to the extent of 50%, where fees to be charged at the level at which it was charged by a government in a government-run college. Now, say for this very course in a government-run college, the fee was rupees 5,000. Then 100 is the total strength of the college. 50% will go to this fee seats. So those students will be paying 5,000, meaning by which per student there is a loss of 45,000 to the institute. Now this scheme provided that this loss of 45,000 is to be recovered from the students who are getting admission on the payment sheet. So in case of a student getting admission on a payment sheet, that student will have to pay 50,000 plus 45,000, which is a loss caused to the institution on account of it being required to give admission to a student on a free seat at a rate prevalent to or prevalent in the concerned government college. So that student getting admission in the order of merit on a payment sheet would pay 95,000 as against the actual cost of imparting education per student is 50,000. So this is how a cross subsidy was provided by this scheme of Unnikrishnan. And what shall be the cost of imparting education? Even that right was not given to the self-financing institutions. A committee of the government was empowered to decide as to what should be the cost of imparting education in a particular self-financing institution. And this is how, on the aspect of fee structure, the scheme proceeded. So in short, there was no functional autonomy to the self-financing institutions in the matter of prescription of fee structure. The second important facet of this scheme was the right of admission. They say right of admission would not be with the self-financing institutions. They will have to accept the students provided to them by the concerned admission committee of the government, and this is how the scheme would operate. So in the matter of fee structure, in the matter of admission, no functional autonomy to the self-financing institution. The only aim was that attempt would be made to see that self-financing institution is in a position to recover the entire cost of imparting education. Now, what was the basis of this scheme? For the purpose of arriving at this scheme, the Supreme Court also came to a conclusion, discarding the per contra contention which was placed into service. The right to establish and run an educational institution is to be construed as a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution of India. The Supreme Court says in Unicastron's case that this cannot be construed as an occupation. This cannot be construed as a profession. This cannot be construed as a business. So right to establish and run an educational institution cannot be construed as a fundamental right available to any citizen of India under Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution of India. This scheme, which was evolved in the year 1992, operated for quite some time. During this time, several interim applications were filed in the Supreme Court seeking modification of the scheme, pointing out that it is difficult to survive with this scheme. The Supreme Court introduced the concept of seats meant for non-resident Indians, where they say you can have further higher fee structure and you can generate the funds by reserving 10 to 15% seats for non-resident Indians. This is how, for the first time, the concept of a special category for non-resident Indians came to be evolved. Then the next stage of journey of SFI with Supreme Court comes with the landmark judgment of the Supreme Court in the case of TMAPI Foundation, and that is 2002, 8 SCC, page 481. Now, this is, I'm sorry, unlike I have to, so the citations are concerned, I can't keep on my tip of tongue like my friend Mr. Pandya, because if you ask him, he will be in a position to tell you that which citation, which page number, but sorry, I am not having that sharp memory. So I will have to just look at my note as to which year the TMA Foundation was delivered by the Supreme Court. So it's 2002, 8 SCC 481. An 11-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India, for the first time introduced, I would say, a sea change in the concept of rights and obligations of self-financing institutions. Let us see how. In this judgment, unanimously it was ruled that scheme which was evolved by the Supreme Court in its decision in the matter of Unnikrishnan was unconstitutional. They say, the Supreme Court says it had the effect of nationalizing the education. Students getting admission on free seats were in a position to pay the fee far less than the actual cost of imparting education at the cost of students getting admission on a payment seat. And the argument which went with the Supreme Court was that when you grant the admission in the order of merit, obviously the student who is first in the merit list will opt for the payment free seats, because he would like to say that he should not pay higher fees. He is first in the merit list. So first free seats would be exhausted and the turn of payment seats would come. And the data which was submitted before the Supreme Court in this TMA by foundation judgment revealed that the students getting admission on these free seats were comparatively from the privileged class of the society because they were having a better facility of education. In other words, though they were having the means to pay the fee based on the actual cost of imparting education, they were required to pay the fee which was meant for free seats. So they were enjoying at the cost of students who were getting admission in the payment seat because they were required to share the burden of fee of the students of free seats, as I explained with the help of that particular example. So Supreme Court said this is nothing but asking students of payment seats to bear the burden of cost of education of students getting admission on the free seats. This kind of nationalization of education, this kind of cross subsidy in the education is wholly impermissible. It violates the mandate of Article 14. There is no basis for classification into free seats and the payment seats when you are not sure that person getting admission on the free seats is economically weaker as compared to the person getting admission on the payment seat. So this is how the Supreme Court said this is not the concept of cost-based system of education. So the scheme of Unnikrishnan is required to be given a go by. It cannot be permitted to hold the field. In addition, in this landmark judgment, and when I said it introduced a sea change, because in Unnikrishnan, the Supreme Court said that Article 19(1)(g) cannot be considered for the purpose of right to establish and run an educational institution. Here, for the first time, the Supreme Court says that right to run and establish an educational institution is an occupation, and therefore it would fall within the purview of Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution of India, and hence it is a fundamental right. Having said so, in TMA Pai judgments, this right, namely right to run or right to establish and run the education institution, the Supreme Court says as having various facets. This right has various sub-rights, namely one, right to evolve a suitable fee structure, right to admit students by evolving a suitable method of admission, right to appoint teaching and non-teaching staff, right to have a governing body of its own. The Supreme Court says that when we say right to run, establish and educate institution is a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(g). These are the facets of this fundamental right, and therefore, in the matter of evaluation of the fee structure, these institutions which are running on the pattern of self-financing, a cost-based system of education, are required to be given a full freedom, and they would be at liberty to evolve their own fee structure, prescribe their own fee structure without any kind of interference from the government. So all government committees, fee regulatory committees were abolished, and institutions were given an absolute free hand, a total functional autonomy in the matter of evolution of the fee structure and the prescription thereof. The only rider which was attached was that such fee structure must be based on the actual cost of imparting education and a reasonable provision for development. Barring this, no other restriction was imposed. In the matter of TMAI Foundation, it was also held that so far as admissions are concerned, there will not be any government interference. The self-financing institutions will be at liberty to admit the students on their own by evolving a suitable method of admission. The rider attached was that such method must be based on merit. Merit should not be permitted to sacrifice. It must be fair, transparent, and non-exploitative. Now, what happened on account of this judgment of TMAI Foundation? The implementation thereof created many problems. Interpretation according to this judgment by the governments was on one side. Interpretation according to this judgment by self-financing institutions was on a different side. This led to series of writ petitions before various high courts on various issues. In some states, the government would not permit a particular self-financing institution to charge a fee which it evolved for itself following TMAI's dictum of law. It would say we will right to control. The institution would say no, we have got a full functional autonomy. So long as we are in a position to establish that it is based on a cost of imparting education, you have no right of interference. So this kind of writ petitions, so also in the matter of admissions, the government would say that we have still right of control, we can still oversee the process of admission, whether it is merit-based or not. So this led to series of writ petitions in various high courts. And ultimately, one of such matters when reached before the Honorable Supreme Court in the matter of Islamic Academy of Education. The Supreme Court thought it fit to call all writ petition to itself and said we'll now finally decide what we actually said in TMAI Foundation, what we meant by TMAI Foundation. So this is how the second journey of the Supreme Court, of the SFIs rather, with the Supreme Court, and that is in the matter of Islamic Academy of Education. And that is 2003, 6 SCC 697. So 1992, we had Mohini Jain. Then 1993, we had Unni Krishnan. Unni Krishnan scheme operated till 2002 with minor modifications. In 2002, TMAI Foundation came, introduced a sea change, scheme was declared as unconstitutional, total functional autonomy was accorded to the institutions running on the pattern of self-financing in the matter of fee structure, in the matter of admission. And then, since implementation thereof was found to be slightly difficult on interpretation of what 11 judges said in TMAI Foundation, matter was again reconsidered with the Supreme Court in the matter of Islamic Academy. Now, in Islamic Academy, the Supreme Court, on the aspect of fee structure, while reading the judgment of Supreme Court in TMAI Foundation, introduced certain riders. The first was that, well, Supreme Court says in Islamic Academy that definitely when right to establish and run an education institution is a fundamental right under 19(1)(g), there has to be functional autonomy to the institutions in the matter of fixation of fee structure. But at the same time, there has to be some control, some check. And therefore, they say that in the absence of legislation introduced by the concerned states at the state level, we would like to exercise our power under Article 141 and make provision for a fee regulatory committee, which will be headed by a retired High Court judge, and the committee will have an assistance of a chartered accountant member, another expert from field, say if it's a medical college, some doctor, if it's an engineering college, some technocrat, and there will be some educationalist. This is how the composition of the committee was prescribed. There will be a representative of the government also. There will be a representative of the management also of the colleges. And that committee will consider as to whether the fee structure proposed by the concerned self-financing educational institution is based on the cost of imparting education and a reasonable provision for development or not. Now, the point which requires to be noted is this. In Islamic academy, right to evolve and right to prescribe thereafter, the fee structure which was provided to the institutions by TMA by judgment was kept intact because it was 11 bench judgment, so it could not have been overruled by a 5-judge bench in Islamic academy. So that was kept intact, but they said this particular prescription of the fee structure upon its evolution by the concerned self-financing institution will be subject to checking by the fee regulatory committee, and that will be keeping in mind only 2 parameters. Number 1, as to whether it is based on cost of imparting education or not, and the reasonable provision for development. Secondly, in the matter of admission, also in this judgment of Islamic academy, the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that if each and every self-financing institution is to be given a total functional autonomy in the matter of admission, then in that case there will be as many admission procedures, there will be as many common entrance tests as there are colleges, because each college would like to have its own procedure. Therefore, what was said in TMAPI was little bit diluted, I would say, in the matter of Islamic academy by introducing a rider to the effect that a self-financing institution will be in a position to have its own procedure for admission by forming an association of such colleges state-wise. Meaning by which if you are in a faculty of engineering, then self-financing institutions of engineering faculty can have their own association, and that association can prescribe a common procedure for admission in respect of all the engineering colleges of particular state, and that again can be supervised by an admission committee, the composition of which was also prescribed by the Supreme Court in this very judgment of Islamic academy in exercise of its power under Article 141. So these 2 things came to be introduced, curtailing little bit the rights of the self-financing institutions in the matter of Islamic academy. In addition to this, in the matter of Islamic academy, the Supreme Court ruled, and that too interpreting TMAPI's judgment, that it will be open for the state to claim certain seats to itself for the purpose of admission, even in respect of a self-financing institution, keeping in mind the local need of the particular area. So this is how in the matter of Islamic academy, the right was given to the state government to allocate to itself certain number of seats for the purpose of granting admissions in respect of the same by evolving its own procedure. Supreme Court in this matter said that how much seats, to what extent the state can claim would be decided keeping in mind the local needs of a particular area. And if the decision of the state government in this regard is not acceptable to the self-financing institution, it will be open for it to approach the admission committee which was constituted by the Supreme Court in the matter of Islamic Academy for each state. And that committee will finally decide as to how many seats in a particular college imparting education on the pattern of self-financing shall go to the government as government seats, and for how many seats the management of that particular institution will be entitled to grant admissions. The fee would remain the same following indication scheme, following TMAPI foundation scheme. Fee would remain the same for all, but certain number of seats would go to the government and they would decide whom to grant admissions. So concept of seat sharing was introduced by Islamic Academic's judgment, and to that extent, the right which was given to self-financing institution was diluted. And they were obliged to agree with the state government if the state government wanted them to part with certain number of seats for the purpose of granting admissions, and that too by following the procedure which state would like to evolve. Now, this scheme under Islamic Academy worked for some number of years. Again in 2005, in the matter of P.A. Inamdar versus State of Maharashtra, that is 2005, 6 SCC 537. A 7-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India was called upon to decide as to whether Islamic judgment traveled beyond TMAPI or not. Because judgment in the matter of Supreme Islamic was by 5 judges bench. Judgment in the matter of 11-judge bench, TMAPI found, could not have been overruled by Islamic. And when they provided the seat sharing concept, when they provided for establishment of fee regulatory committees, admission committees, so in a way the functional autonomy accorded to the self-financing institutions by TMAPI was curtailed. So again, matter was referred to a 7-judge bench in P.A. Inamdar's case to decide as to whether Islamic judgment was in conformity with TMAPI or not. And therefore, I initially used that SFI on their voyage with Supreme Court. Starting from 1992, at least for the time being, it has halted in 2016 with modern dental tool. I'll revert soon, but I am not sure because once I refer to modern dental, I'll explain. Even that also requires, that would also warrant reconsideration after some time. So what happened now in P.A. Inamdar? Now, if you look at the judgment in P.A. Inamdar, Chief Justice Lahoti has expressly pointed out in the beginning that having learned from Islamic Academy that if you say something while interpreting a particular judgment, it can be misconstrued later on. So they say, I would like to preface my judgment by stating that we do not intend to say anything contrary to what TMAPI has said, because we can't say so, because we are only a 7-judge bench. There's a judgment by 11-judge bench. It's binding on us. And therefore, while deciding on the questions referred to us in this matter, more particularly as to whether Islamic Academy was rightly decided or not, we are expressly clarifying that even if we have said something in this judgment which runs contrary to what has been obtainable from TMAPI Foundation, please ignore it. With that clarification, enough is enough. From Mohini Jain to Unni Krishnan to TMAPI to Islamic, and now in P.A. Inamdar, there has to be end to this litigation. And therefore, he is prefacing his judgment by saying that TMAPI Foundation judgment has to hold the field. We are simply trying to interpret, and for any reason our interpretation is found to be contrary to what is obtainable from TMFI, please do not accept that, because we never intend to. We can't even say contrary to what the Supreme Court has said in TMFI Foundation. Now, with this preface, in PA Inamdar, the Supreme Court holds that the concept of seat sharing introduced by Islamic, whereby state would have a right to claim certain number of seats from a self-financing institution for the purpose of admission, as they are doing for government colleges. That particular concept of seat sharing was found to be traveling beyond the law laid down by the Supreme Court in the matter of TMFI Foundation, violative of the fundamental right available to the self-financing institutions under Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution of India, and to that extent, Islamic judgment was overruled in PA Inamdar. The constitution of the committees, fee regulatory committees, admission committees, PA Inamdar says it is in conformity with TMFI judgment, because Article 19(1)(g) also can be subjected to reasonable restriction. This is a reasonable restriction, and therefore it is required to be permitted to hold the field. So this is how PA Inamdar interprets Islamic Academy. But while doing so, PA Inamdar's judgment says that if government wants for any reason certain number of seats for the purpose of admission in a self-financing institution, it is possible. It says not absolutely banned. This concept of seat sharing can be introduced in a self-financing institution, but with the consent of a self-financing institution. Meaning by which the state will have to go to the self-financing institution, convince them, persuade them to part with certain number of seats to the government for the purpose of admission. So PA Inamdar judgment says seat sharing is permissible only with the consent of the concerned self-financing institution. PA Inamdar also upheld the right of self-financing institutions to grant admissions as held in TMFI Foundation. But it said that what was provided by Islamic Academy was this right, to the effect that the colleges will have to form an association and there has to be a single window process of admission that is required to permit it to hold the field. Now, try to appreciate this. In PA Inamdar, the right of the management of a self-financing institution to grant admissions, which was originally evolved in TMFI Foundation, little bit regularized in Islamic, was permitted to hold the field even in PA Inamdar's judgment by a 7-judge bench. In addition, in PA Inamdar's judgment, they said that reservation policy of the state cannot be forced upon self-financing institutions. So this in turn led to Constitutional Amendment 93, Constitutional Amendment, Article 15(6) was introduced. And on account of that now, overruling what was ruled in PA Inamdar judgment, in self-financing institutions, reservation has been made possible. Now this PA Inamdar's judgment again came to be considered by the Supreme Court in the matter of Modern Dental Institute, and that is a recent judgment, recent last judgment, major judgment of the Supreme Court on this score, and that is 2016 7 SCC 353. I begin 2016 7 SCC 353. Now here is state legislation introduced by the state of MP, state of Madhya Pradesh, was in question. Now in the state of MP, now almost in all states this legislation is operating. Gujarat, Maharashtra, Punjab and Haryana, everywhere, a legislation of a similar nature is holding the field. Now, as per this legislation, in self-financing institutions, the right to grant admissions would be of the admission committee constituted by the state under the legislation. The right of the self-financing institutions to grant admissions by evolving their own procedure was given a complete go-by. And they said that no, if you are a medical faculty, you are engineering faculty, we'll have separate admission committee for that, one for technical courses, one for medical and paramedical courses. And this committee will decide the modus of admission. Even the common entrance test will be conducted for all colleges, maybe self-finance, maybe government, maybe granting aid by government agency. The self-financing institution will not be permitted to hold their own common entrance test for their colleges through their association as permitted in the matter of PA Inamdar. Now, when validity of this legislation was questioned in modern dental, first Madhya Pradesh High Court upheld the validity of that, and SLB will go to the Supreme Court in this matter. The Supreme Court interprets PA Inamdar judgment to the effect that it is permissible for the state to have this kind of control over self-financing institutions, and they can take away the right of admission totally. The self-financing institution will not have any say in the matter of admission. So we are brought back to Unni Krishnan era. I am not suggesting even for a moment that what has been done is not good for the society, because what appears to me that in a modern dental, the Supreme Court was more concerned with the malpractices which were reported in the matter of admission. And they felt the necessity of the time that now there is a need to reread our own judgment, because they could not have overruled TMA Pi. So the issue on which I would like, I beg to differ is that tomorrow if someone wants to question again the ratio of modern dental, it is definitely in negation of what the Supreme Court had said in TMA Pi Foundation. And try to appreciate how Supreme Court has interpreted differently this very judgment of TMA Pi, contrary to what the Supreme Court has held in PA Inamdar. Now, if you look at the judgment of PA Inamdar, and if you refer to two paragraphs, paragraph 125 and paragraph 137, I'll just read one line from paragraph 125 of a Supreme Court judgment in the matter of PA Inamdar. Unaided institutions can have their own admissions if fair, transparent, and non-exploitative and based on merit. So clearly, this is what a 7-judge bench held in PA Inamdar, interpreting TMA Pi's judgment, which was by 11-judge bench, with the preface that we could not have overruled it, and even if by mistake we have said something which runs contrary to it, please ignore it, follow it. But here in this paragraph 125, in clear terms, right is accorded to the self-financing institutions to evolve their own procedure of admission through their association by following a triple test, they call it. The procedure must be fair, procedure must be transparent, and must be non-exploitative. In short, it must be merit-based. Now, that particular right is again reiterated by the Supreme Court in PA Inamdar judgment in paragraph 137. And they again say that it is open for the self-financing institutions to evolve their own procedure of admission through association. Now, in this paragraph 137, there is one simple line, and that particular line just I would like to again read for you, before you rather, because just to show that how the very judgment has been interpreted differently and can be interpreted differently. Now here in paragraph 137, the Supreme Court in P.A. Namdas case says that the admission procedure so adopted by a private institution or a group of institution, if it fails to satisfy all or any of the triple tests indicated herein above, can be taken over by the state substituting its own procedure. So this was a provision in the judgment, a safety valve, that in a given case, if any association is found to be indulging into malpractice and not following this triple test, namely admission process is fair, transparent, non-exploitative, it can be taken over by the state government, and state government can say that we will now have the admission process of our own. Now this is a safety measure provided in the judgment for a case-to-case basis. It cannot be as a general proposition of law to say that state government has the right to impose its own method of admission and take away the right of self-financing institutions. This particular line in paragraph 137 has been relied upon in Modern Dental to say that state has a right, and when there are mushrooming growth of complaints of similar nature, state is justified in passing a legislation which would take away the right of the self-financing institutions in the matter of admission, which was given to them by TMAPA Foundation. And this is how the Modern Dental operates. Now, in my view, though what has been held in Modern Dental may be with an award object, but legally speaking, the principle laid down therein, the ratio laid down therein, can be debated definitely as running counter to what the Supreme Court has said in its 11th judgment in the matter of TMAPA Foundation. Now, since I think we are on the verge of completing, because time slot allotted to me is on the verge of completion, Mr. Vikas, can I continue for 10 minutes more?
You can do that.
Yeah, I get it, fine. Now you see, let me now explain, because in TMAPA Foundation, when this right of admission has been given, the rationale behind this, because neither in the judgment of Modern Dental nor in the judgment of P.A. Namdas, nowhere this has been elaborately discussed. Why functional autonomy to a particular self-financing institution in the matter of admission? What is the rationale behind that? The rationale is this, that an output of any self-financing institution would depend upon the input it gets. Now, if you are not having a choice in the matter of admission, say you are an institution of a repute, you would like to have a stringent test of admission. The test, common entrance test, which the state would like to conduct, would not be having that high standard. So person securing an admission on the basis of the common entrance test conducted by the state may not be matching your level, your expectation. You would like to judge the performance of the student on your own scale, which is quite higher because you are an institution of a repute. That right is taken away on account of this judgment of the Modern Dental. Because, say, let us take a base medical college, and that was in fact the argument Cadvance also before the Supreme Court, that at Value Christian Medical College is considered very highly rated. They say we would like to have our own standard of admission, We would like to have a very stringent test for the purpose of deciding who qualifies. You are depriving us of our that right. And that particular aspect, in my opinion, will arise in future. And so the journey of SFIs with the Supreme Court, which has begun with Mohini Jain, which has temporarily halted en route TMA Pai, Unikrishnan, TMA Pai, PA Inamdar, Islamic, Modern Dental, is going to commence again shortly. So thank you very much for providing me the audience, and if any queries, any questions are there, I would be glad to answer.
Thank you, sir. The session, as we had said, that it would be very enlightening. In fact, what I had perceived, it has gone much better than that, to the effect that the way you, what we can say in the law, that you have compiled every judgment in a systematic manner. Any person who is joined and he's not even a student of law, is just joining it, let's assume he's working and he wants to get the insights to that, I'm quite sure that he would definitely gain from the way you have elaborated it. Now I'll just take the questions which have been posted till now. YV Vishweshwara Rao. Self-financing teaching and non-teaching staff regulating authority. And is it government or the committee constituted by the self-finance employer? Please enlighten us on this topic.
Can you just, I'm didn't get it. What is it? Self-financing?
It is self-financing teaching and non-teaching staff regulating the authority is the government or the committee constituted by the self-finance institution employer.
Okay, got it. Now, so far as service conditions of self-financing institutions employees are concerned, they are at par with those who are serving in government colleges or are granting aid colleges. Recently, in the matter of Mahatma Gandhi Institute, Supreme Court had an occasion to consider, because that happened in that case, the concerned college refused to implement 6 pay commission, quite non-teaching staff, saying that it is beyond our capacity because the fees which have been permitted to be charged by the fee regulatory committee are not sufficient to recover the cost of imparting education, and we cannot afford this higher salary structure, and the pay revision we cannot implement. The Supreme Court in that matter says that whether it is your moderation how to raise the fund, if your fees are less and you are not in a position to recover the cost of imparting education, go and complain before the fee regulatory committee for enhancement. But that would not be a handle in your hand not to pay salary to the employees of a self-financing institution. And more particularly on the query that who is the controlling authority. So it depends upon the concerned state legislation. Say for an example, in Gujarat, depending upon the institution in which you are serving. Suppose if you are serving in an institution which is affiliated to a state and university on a pattern of self-financing, then you are governed by the Education Tribunal Act, which will govern your service conditions. Your service conditions are equally protected. If you are a private university, then your service conditions are not regulated by Education Tribunal Act, and then your service condition will be regulated by the relevant statutes and regulations framed by that particular private university. So if you say that a particular self-financing institution, then in that case, I would say that if it is affiliated with the university, with a state-run university, then its service conditions are controlled by the concerned Education Tribunal Act prevalent in the state. In short, hire and fire will not prevail even in a self-financing institutions. Definitely, it will not prevail.
This is by Anand Bhardwaj. Is there any statutory provision for constituting a committee to determine the cost of imparting education?
Yes.
What cost determined institution-wise or area-wise or course-wise?
Yes. You see, Following the judgment of Islamic Academy, almost all states have come out with the registration, and committees have been constituted thereunder. And as I understood, Anand was also heading one such committees in the state of Punjab and Haryana. So that committee will decide the fee structure. Now, if you go strictly as per the law, the institution will have to propose a fee structure, which will be checked by the committee. And if the committee comes to a conclusion that the fee structure is based on the cost of imparting education, and for the purpose of deciding this aspect, the data of last 3 years will be taken into consideration, the accounting data of a concerned college. And if the accounting data of last three years would indicate a particular cost, and based on that, you will have a projection for the future. And if the committee feels the projection is a reasonable projection, then in that case, the committee would permit that particular fee structure, stating that it is based on a cost of imparting education, and then some provision for future development of that particular institution to the extent of 10 to 15% of the cost of imparting actual education. So there is a committee. Fee structure is always regulated by fee regulatory committees in all states.
This has been delayed. We can, since you had referred to Justice S.D. Anand, since he was at the helm of the affairs of the fee regulatory, we will ask his inputs and his insights and what was the way they worked out in the while regulating the fees. Over to you, sir.
Thank you.
Anand, sir.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Yes.
You see, the fee committee consists of a chartered accountant, 2 or 3 engineering members, and is headed by a former judge of the High Court. That is so in the state of Haryana. We used to afford absolute liberty to the managements to say whatever they had to in the form of a documentation supported by the evidence relatable thereto. We found, to be exact, we were informed by the committee was informed by the Director General Technical Action at that time, that as many as about 200 private institutions had closed down. They are required to have the permission of the DG Technical Education to close down. So we devised a way out. We wanted that if on the one hand we should not permit the private institutions to indulge in profiteering, surely we wanted them to stay afloat as well. And as a conscious decision, the committee headed by me at that point of time, and with a unanimous decision, we decided that whatever amount chargeable as fees determined, leaving aside the development charges and other miscellaneous items, the institution shall be entitled to 15% of the amount in addition thereto. It's such a as Mr. Dave said, it's a long journey over a period of time, and it's not likely to end. It will extend to beyond the time this COVID disappears, if at all it does. It speaks volumes of the ambience of the justice delivery system, that as and when something of importance, something of vital value is brought to the notice of the courts, it is taken care of. As you have seen, the 3 judges, 5 judges, 7 judges, 11 judges, and thereafter the bench, 7 judges said, we cannot overrule the 11th bench judgment. But wherever we are found to have said something which is not in consonance with that, do not implement it. We must always remember, the
Yes.
private institutions are all said and done discharging a duty which the state owes to the citizens to provide education. Though you have right of education also. It is not possible for the state to do it in view of the ever galloping population. It must be ensured that the institutions, and I agree with Mr. Dave, lest I forget that there are institutions in the state of Haryana, elsewhere also, wherein the credentials which the students gain, the quality of students which they turn out, is far superior to those who come out of the government institutions. It's not a reflection on any institution. But on point of fact, let us not entertain a feeling that private education institutions may sub Gorak Dhanda. It's not that. They have to build themselves, build a reputation. And some of the institutions have indeed been able to build. State cannot be allowed to have an overall say in the matter of admissions. And as even the Supreme Court held it, they legislate, they assume their jurisdiction. Whether the assumption is right or wrong, that the courts will decide. But those institutions are private institutions, are indeed performing a duty, and that's that. Rest all facets arising out of this heavy roster have been dealt with by Mr. Dave with immaculate elaboration. Immaculate elaboration. I must congratulate him for that. Thank you very much.
So we have Mr. Pandya also, who is not only an established lawyer, avid reader, and avid listener. We would also have his insights on this particular question.
Thank you very much, Vikas ji. It was, in fact, indeed a very good exposition of law by Mr. Dave. Actually, I was glued to my seat. I could not get up. And I listened to him very patiently, and it has clarified every aspect of each judgment, because it is not possible for everyone to read these judgments running into 1,000 pages. So he has given the crux of each judgment and how the journey of self-financing institutions has traveled so far. So I must congratulate Mr. Dave, and I indeed enjoyed the session fantastically.
So you have actually taken my words to the effect that yes, I felt that all the participants who were listening to him were actually glued by the way he just put the things across. This is by Nilesh Bhardwaj. Since all three are there, so Mr. Dave would be the key one, but we will also have your insights. So I would request both of you also, Justice S.D. Anand and Mr. Pandya, to listen to this question, since Mr. S.D. Anand is closely listening. In a scenario where even a state is not able to finance state government universities through UGC and state budget, and changing almost all courses, professionals in particular, to self-financing module where neither the teachers are regular nor poor meritorious students are able to pay the fees. Where do you see our education going in future, especially for poor students who used to get admissions in government-run institutions having nominal course fees? How practical it is to give reservation in master's courses, especially when seats are limited from 4 to 10 in specific fields? First, I will ask Mr. Dave to give his insight.
Yes, I certainly agree, because you see what has happened. The government has now stopped investing into education institutions. If I look at my own state, Gujarat, I think in last 25 years, the government has not set up any medical college. Now, in Gujarat, the government is also working on the pattern of self-financing. In Gujarat, the Gujarat government has formed a trust, which is basically government itself was instrumental in forming a trust. And that trust is running various medical colleges on the pattern of self-financing. So the grievance of one who is not in a position to afford higher education, equitably speaking, is absolutely justified. But if you look legally, with introduction of Article 21A, right to education, following what Supreme Court has said in Unnikishtan's case, they say is only restricted to the age of 14 years. After 14 years, you have no right as a fundamental right to claim education from the government. So this is how the legal situation is. This is more a policy decision to be taken by the government, how to take care of those who are unable to secure admissions on account of financial constraint. Of course, now government has come out with the scheme of 10% reservation for those who are economically weak, EBC quota. Of course, that reservation will not have any financial assistance, because then you are only provided reservation in a college on that particular quota. There is no reduction in the fee there. So the question raised, according to me, deserves the attention at the level of the government and how they intend to take care of the situation. Otherwise, legally, I don't think it's an enforceable right now.
I think I entirely agree with Mr. Dave that the state is not investing in the education. I'll give you two concrete examples. Few years ago, a committee was set up by the Government of India under the chairmanship of Justice Sri Krishna of the Apex Court. The meeting was summoned for determination of the fee structure and the like matters of the institutions under the All India Technical Education Board. Would you be surprised, except the state of Haryana, which I represented, and I took along the DG as well, there was no other state which was represented by an official higher than the rank of an undersecretary. Mostly they were superintendents, were not in the know of the roster. There was certain amount of displeasure also conveyed, but well, things being as these are, of course, his lordship gave the report and it was implemented too. Insofar as the investment aspect is concerned, we have the EWS, economically weaker section, students who have to be admitted to the schools in the neighborhood, right to, under the right to education.
Right to Education Act.
I'm informed that in 90% of the cases, not even a penny has been reimbursed to those schools. That's the information under the Right to Information Act provided by the various education officers, block education officers. You write to the government, you would not get a reply. You write to these officers, they are in any case still scared of the information and they would provide it. And there's nothing to conceal about it. It's time. I'm not referring to any particular government. Question is the state. State is the repository of faith of the interest of citizens, be it health, be it education. These are the two aspects where we have been in certain facets found wanting. Steps are being taken to rectify, of course, and we hope and trust needful will be done. Is there any other reason why the schools who have admitted economically weaker section students, why they should not be reimbursed? Should you not hold the relevant administrative secretary responsible for not reimbursement? Of course, the political class would have no idea. They are there to give directions. The ground reality is that the implementation has to come about at the hands of the education officers and then the administrative department. With the availability of this computerization, you can have information on the just mere pressing of a button. Should you not get time to, Mr. Dave, bear me out, you find even in matters where a particular view has been taken by a high court or has attained finality at the level of the apex court, still the departments will keep on referring the matter, say, to the legal department for opinion or to the higher authorities for guidance. You have to improve the system of administration. I'm restricting my presentation only to the education department for the matter there. Please ensure that schools who respect your policy, say compulsively, must get proper reimbursement. That's the only way you'll spread education, you'll be able to provide education. That's all I have to say on that aspect.
One aspect which he said, that what about the reservation policy in this?
Reservation policy?
In these self-financing institutions?
Yes, now in view of Article 15(6), reservation has to follow in SFIs. You can't say no. State has been empowered to frame legislation for that. And every state has got the legislation. All SFIs, reservation policy has been applicable on all seats.
This is a request by Srinivas Mulguri that kindly throw some light on the rights of minority educational institutions?
Minority educational institutions have been given a limited right if they are running on the pattern of self-financing. They are equated with all. There is no distinction now. They say that whether you are a minority or a non-minority. So far as the TMFI judgment is concerned, it says they fall in the same category, except that a minority institution will have an additional right under Article 30, whereby it can insist to admit students of that particular minority to a certain level. That's all. That's the only limited right given under TMFI. Otherwise, minority or non-minority. In the matter of admission, in the matter of fee structure, there is no distinction. Of course, in the reservation policy, yes, Article 15(6) counts as an exception that reservation policy of the state cannot be implemented in a minority institution if it is working on the pattern of self-financing. That's the only distinction. Otherwise, there is no distinction between minority and non-minority so far as self-financing pattern of education is concerned.
What about the teaching and non-teaching staff of minority institutions, whether they would be governed by this government?
Yes, yes, they will be governed. Now it's because you see minimum qualification which are prescribed, because in all professional courses, let me first of all say this judgment of Supreme Court in all these matters is mainly concerned with the professional courses at the higher level. So in all professional courses, we have the councils at the apex level. Say if it's a technical course, we have got All India Council for Technical Education. If it's a medicine course, we have got a Medical Council of India, Dental Council of India. Each council is prescribing minimum qualification required for appointing a teaching staff. That qualification is required to be followed by all. In the matter of selection also, now the procedure is in that government, there is a procedure of forming a committee for the state of Gujarat. So if you are affiliated to a particular university, you must have consent of that particular university before you make an appointment. Now that procedure has been made applicable even to a minority institution also.
Let me just clarify my question. Whether the judgment in Xavier's College, which was long back in respect of, whether it holds good today or not in view of the latest development in respect of termination or disciplinary action?
Yes, it holds good. It holds good. Still, it holds good. No doubt about it. We are talking in your question, as I understand, was whether in the matter of appointment, a self-financing institution run by a minority can claim some kind of relaxation in the matter of appointment or not. There, my answer is no, it cannot. It has to follow the minimum qualification prescribed by the concerned apex body. It cannot deviate from that. In the matter of disciplinary action, yes, that's on a different footing. Right. In the matter of appointment, all are equal. In the matter of pay scale, also all are equal.
In the matter of pay scale, doesn't it say that whatever the rules are to be governed, that has to be given? Because in Haryana, there is Rule 165. It says that you have to grant minimum of the pay scale plus some benefits, but you can't bring them at par with that of a regular employee, because even in the aided schools, at least in Punjab, Haryana, they are virtually on the closure part, because in Haryana we have financing of 75-25 in an aided institution. They say the salaries are too much that they can't even share the 25%. That is what invariably has happened, and that is why in Haryana they have formed the act to state therein that all the employees of the aided schools have been absorbed in state of Haryana employees. And so much so, the another matter which has happened in so far as probably it would have happened in Gujarat also, you are the better Mr. Pandey as well as Mr. Dave would be able to explain, that invariably all the schools were in the outskirts, but 1950-60. Now they feel that at the back of the mind, they are thinking that it's a source of income also. They feel it's better to build up something else or dispose of that property, because that gives them better return than what the education, because what was education is a system to pay back to the society. People invariably are not thinking in that way. What I've been experiencing during the court and outside the court. What is your take on that?
You see, now you see that I do agree, because that philanthropic approach has gone. Now you will not find people coming out. Of course, there are some trusts which are still in the field of education and doing it. But when the philanthropists were there, and earlier when trusts used to run the colleges, you see, they were all on the pattern of granting aid. Now, when you say that you have to run the sports or impart education a pattern of self-financing, naturally they would like to generate some funds. To say that be philanthropic sounds good in the book, but look at the harsh reality of life. If you want to set up a medical college, it's a mammoth task. Look at the land. First of all, you require a huge area of the land. Then you have to set up a medical college. You see, if you go in we never consider this in the matter of Islamic Academy. If I can just lay my hand, Justice S.P. Sinha has referred to, because this has come from our petition, because we are filed, I am appearing for one of the parties in Gujarat High Court, Charotwar Arogya Mandal, and our matter was transferred to the Supreme Court. In our petition also, we gave a data which is reproduced somewhere in judgment of Justice S.P. Sinha. It's a concurring judgment. And there he has quoted, because we furnished that data, that in the parliament, apropos a question raised to the health minister, that how much is the cost government incurs for a medical education. And based upon the survey of some 1989, Ferguson and Company, a famous firm of chartered accountants, was given a task of working out the cost of imparting education in a government medical college. So in 1989, per student, government used to incur around 2 lakhs as a cost of imparting education. Now, you see, today that figure is high by huge number. Now, if you say that you invest in a medical college, incur so much of cost, and be happy with whatever you earn, it sounds, according to me, a ridiculous thing, and nobody would accept. Sounds nice in a book, but not in practice. Because everybody would like to see that they flourish when they invest something. So those objects that I am in the field of education and I would like to give something in return, according to me, would be only in the books nowadays, because everybody would look at some kind of benefit when they are investing so much. And therefore, better thing is that we have to see that they may not indulge into any malpractice. Otherwise, and that's the reason there are so many good universities which have come up. Say Jindal, for example, law, they are rated very high. Take the example of Nalsar law. Take some good medical colleges. So to expect a philanthropic approach every time may not be possible in today's world.
In fact, I would say even the state is not coming to that extent, because the amount of returns,
Yes.
not returns in terms of profit, but in terms of the objective, also feel that that amount could be spent somewhere else, and they would be able to decimate the message of socialness.
The resources of the state are very limited. No? That's the reason, because it's not education, it's a government policy. It's not their priority.
So there's a common question which we can take it in one shot. It says whether SFIs are under obligation to furnish information under the RTI or not.
If we go by the recent judgment of the Supreme Court in the matter of D.V. Patil College, Bombay's college, right? Yes, they are, because they have interpreted the provisions of RTI Act to mean that they are basically discharging a function which is a public function. Though speaking for myself, if you look strictly at the RTI Act, as SFIs would not fall within the purview of RTI Act. Because if you look at the definition of public authority and the Right to Information Act, unless and until you are substantially financed by the state government or a central government, you cannot be called a public authority. So if I have to restrict that particular judgment to the facts of that case, without saying much against that judgment, and if I have to answer the question strictly from the standpoint of Right to Information Act, according to me, a self-financing institution is not qualifying as a public authority and is not bound by the Right to Information Act. But there is another way as people do it. Suppose you call upon the fee regulatory committee, suppose you want some information with regard to a particular college. then the data of that particular college is bound to be with the fee regulatory committee. And fee regulatory committee, being a public authority, is bound to give you the data, of course, with the consent of that particular college. And that college can deny a consent only on a valid ground and not otherwise. But if you say self-financing institution as an individual authority, then according to me, with due reference to the Supreme Court judgment, is not bound to furnish information because it is not a public authority.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Though the questions are coming, but we will not take, I will just ask one common question which has been posted, since all three of you are having one on the other side of the bench and two this side and established practice. They say, what is your take? This time we will go by the reverse. We will ask Mr. Dave at the end. What is your take and advice to the young lawyers? How to establish their niche within the profession? First with Mr. Pandya, then Mr. Anand, and then Mr. Dave.
I would say that every lawyer after reaching certain age would like to preach. I would not go in that preaching. I would say that this is a profession where everyone is a student. So one should start learning and keep on learning. That's only advice I would like to give. I would not like to give any further sermons because it's customary for everyone who has put on more than 25 years of practice to say that in my days we used to do this and you are not doing. I would say just treat this profession as a learning profession, continue with the learning, keep reading judgments. I would only recommend one thing, that if you, and more particularly the judgments of early days, which definitely make your concept more clear.
I would only say one thing, one liner, that lawyer's profession, 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. That's all.
Well said.
So we can say we have, it's for the first instance that both the lawyers are on the same page. So we can ask the judicial verdict in his own way, in his own style.
You see, it's a profession. I remember in one of the programs, my co-panelist was asked for a piece of advice to the lawyers, and he said, it's very tough. Do not entertain a rosy picture. Everybody has to live his life. And I'm obsessed with it. My views may be found to be a result of an obsession. I am a fourth-generation lawyer. My dad's uncle had been principal of Lahore Law College during the pre-partition days. I feel it's a noble profession. If you stick to it, in due course of time, you will earn as well. If you are somehow not able to earn, you will look for other avenues. It's a noble profession. You get an opportunity to protect the rights of your clients, citizens. I remember an article appearing in the national newspaper where one of the top eagles, lawyers, he said, it's a religious duty. If you are able to get justice for your client, you have, besides earning for self, performed a religious duty. Young lawyers, for students who do law, there are plenty of avenues. They can join the prosecution. They can join various banks as law officers. Those who opt to join the profession of advocacy, I think it's a wonderful profession. If God blesses them with success by and by, it's not that you join today. If you are not from an influential quarter, allow me not to elaborate, you will have to labor. You will have to labor. There is no reason why success would not come your way. The most noble profession, though without any sense of comparison with others, I would always advise a young lawman, go at it. You will go places ultimately, on the bench or in practice also. If you have a flourishing practice, you may not even like to go to the bench. So my advice or take, I wouldn't describe it as sermon, is, yes, it's good to be a lawyer. It's noble to be a lawyer. Thank you.
So this, the insights given by all three of you on the how to make a name, niche, or what your advice to the lawyer could be. one thing which commonly came out was that there's a hard work. There is no substitute to the hard work in the profession, and one should keep on doing hard work. One should apprise himself with the latest judgments. And they say that tools for a lawyer are his knowledge and hard work. So that, according to you, should be kept on sharpening. With a flux of time, one can create his own niche. So all those participants who have joined us on the platform as well as on live Facebook, we are thankful to you that you have been encouraging us, and that motivates us to do better, to bring speakers who can give their insightful sessions. And we are more happy that people, along with the speakers, have started joining, who have themselves created their own space within this world. They are also joining us and motivating us. That says what I'm reminded, lage raho munna bhai, people will keep on going ahead. And before parting for today, tomorrow's webinar would be maintenance under the different provisions of law by former judge of the Bombay High Court, Justice Shalini Falsadkar. Do join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. to have the insights on maintenance under the different issues and different laws. I'm quite sure that it will be an issue which invariably, not only to the lawyers, students of law and common man, is a session not to be actually looked upon, but yes, to be discussed upon, and the right perspective would give them insightful. Thank you to all the participants once again, and special thanks to Mr. Dave, who has given the insights to us to a topic in such a lucid manner and immaculately expressed all things. We are thankful to you, and special thanks to Mr. Pandya and Mr. Justice S.D. Anand. Also, they say giving their insights in a different way, that gave the session its own different dimension, because three people giving their insights in a different way is always better. But star of the day, with all respect and humility, and my apologies to them, I will say was Mr. Dave, because the way he took us along to the entire journey of the law under the self-financing institution. Thank you to everyone. Stay safe, stay blessed. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. we will connect again. Thank you.
My gratitude to Mr. Dave and Mr. Pandya.
Deeply obliged. Deeply obliged. Yes.